Welcome back to our conversation on emotion and decision making. Today's discussion dives into how emotions not only color our everyday choices, but can fundamentally alter our ability to make decisions, in both beneficial and harmful ways.
Absolutely. So let's start with the idea that emotion is not just something incidental, it can be directly tied to the decision itself, right?
Exactly. One of the key points is the distinction between integral and incidental emotions. Integral emotions arise directly from the decision at hand. Think of feeling anxious when weighing investment options, which then guide your choice. On the other hand, incidental emotions come from unrelated situations, like, say, a gloomy day affecting your risk tolerance.
Yeah, I get that. And it's interesting, right, that even when we have solid cognitive information, these emotions can override what seems rational.
Right. It's like you might know logically that flying is safer than driving. But if you're feeling an intense fear of flying, that integral emotion can bias you into choosing to drive, even if statistically it's riskier.
Exactly. That brings us neatly to the appraisal tendency framework, which really breaks down how specific emotions can trigger different cognitive predispositions. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, the appraisal tendency framework, or ATF as it's often called, posits that each discrete emotion carries distinct cognitive appraisals. For example, anger is linked with high certainty, control, and assigning responsibility to others, whereas fear is characterized by low certainty and low control. So, when you're angry, you might underestimate risk and see events as more predictable. When you're fearful, your processing tends to be more cautious, heightening
Yep,
perceived
that's
risks.
fascinating. And it's intriguing that even emotions with the same valence can influence decisions differently because of these distinct appraisals, isn't it?
Absolutely. Take anger and sadness, all negative, right? But anger might push you to see less risk and take more aggressive actions, while sadness might lead you to be more methodical or even to focus on potential rewards in a very different way.
Yeah, that differentiation is critical. Now, I also found it compelling how the research shows that emotions actually influence the depth of our thought. Can you talk about how emotions affect whether we process information heuristically or in a more systematic fashion?
For sure, research suggests that positive moods tend to signal safety, encouraging heuristic, quick, sometimes superficial processing. In contrast, negative moods, like fear or sadness, cue us to process more systematically and carefully. However, there are nuances. For instance, even among negative emotions, anger might paradoxically encourage heuristic processing because it instills a sense of certainty. It's like, anger can shut down deep reflection by making you feel sure about your perspective.
Interesting twist there. So essentially, the type of emotion determines not just what we think about, but also how deeply we process information.
Exactly. And that ties directly into how our goals get activated. Emotions, through their associated action tendencies, set up implicit goals. For example, disgust can trigger an action tendency to reject or expel, which might diminish the endowment effect. In contrast, sadness can heighten the desire for change, sometimes reversing typical biases.
Right, that feeling is for doing idea really applies here. Speaking of biases, the review also discusses the concept of bounded rationality. It seems that our cognitive limitations, compounded by emotional influences, mean our choices often deviate from what a purely rational model would predict.
Exactly. Bounded rationality is all about recognizing that our decision making is inherently limited by factors like cognitive capacity and contextual constraints, and importantly, by emotions. Emotions serve as potent drivers that can shortcut the often laborious process of weighing all available information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost as if emotions can simplify our decision making in a way that's efficient, but sometimes at the cost of being less optimal.
You got it. And in response to these emotional biases, researchers have been exploring methods to reduce unwanted emotional influences. For instance, techniques like time delays, reappraisal, and modifying the choice architecture can help mitigate the effects of strong emotions when making decisions.
Right? Like waiting for that initial surge of emotion to subside before deciding. But isn't it also true that sometimes these emotional influences are too closely tied to the decision making process to simply be brushed aside?
Yes, exactly. Sometimes the emotional signal is so integral to the decision that trying to insulate the process from it, like using financial incentives or more complex cognitive strategies, doesn't always work. Instead, strategies that work on the environment itself, like setting good defaults in choice architecture, have shown promise. These can control for emotional biases without requiring the decision maker to engage in eminently difficult cognitive suppression.
That's a good point. Now, one of the more comprehensive parts of this review was the proposal of the emotion imbued choice model. Could you break that down a little bit?
Sure, the emotion imbued choice model integrates both traditional rational inputs and the often non conscious emotional inputs. Essentially, it acknowledges that our decisions are shaped by predicting our future emotional responses to outcomes and by the current emotions we experience at the moment of choice. So, along one path, you have the calculated risk and reward evaluation, and along another, you have emotions influencing the weights we assign to different outcomes. It's like a marriage of rational utility models with the messy yet highly influential domain of emotion.
Definitely a holistic description. And this model factors in both stable individual traits like baseline anxiety and situational triggers such as ambiguous outcomes that can stir up fear.
Exactly. The model shows that characteristics of the decision maker, the inherent characteristics of the options themselves, anticipated emotions, and even incidental mood from unrelated events all converge to affect our overall decision making
Right,
process.
that comprehensive integration is really eye-opening. In a real-world example, if someone is experiencing sadness because of a personal loss and is then offered a choice between a small immediate reward versus a bigger delayed reward, that sadness might push them to favor the immediate option, even if it's not objectively the best deal. Is that the idea?
Perfect example. The model suggests that incidental sadness can elevate one's discount rate, essentially devaluing future gains. At the same time, any anticipated positive outcome might nudge the decision back in the other direction. So, the final decision is this interplay of baseline dispositions, the immediate emotional state, and the predicted feelings regarding each outcome.
Exactly. What strikes me is how, despite the complexity of these models, the evidence across studies has been remarkably consistent. Emotions are not random noise, but are systematic, persistent influences on judgment and decision making.
Totally. Research over the last 35 years has shown that, whether it's influencing risk perception, shaping interpersonal decisions, or even tweaking our discount rates, emotions are both predictable and powerful. This challenges the traditional view where only logical reasoning and probability assessments matter.
It's like emotions are the unsung architects behind our choices. And then there's the idea that higher emotional intelligence might help individuals recognize and perhaps counteract these incidental effects. Do you think that holds promise for future research?
I do. Some studies suggest that people with higher emotional intelligence or better emotion understanding abilities can identify when an emotion isn't truly relevant to the decision at hand. In doing so, they might screen out the biasing influence of incidental emotions. However, the overall evidence is mixed because many of these influences are non conscious. It's hard to detect and override them once they're in play.
Yeah, it's a tough nut to crack for sure. I also noticed that the paper suggests that while methods like suppression or even awareness can help, they're often effortful and sometimes even counterproductive.
Exactly. Techniques like suppression can actually intensify the experience of the emotion, and excessive cognitive effort might impair memory or lead to overprocessing. In short, when our emotions are vivid and salient, the best approach might, ironically, be to change the decision environment itself, what researchers call modifying the choice architecture, to guide better decisions automatically.
Right, sometimes the environment does the work for you. It really underscores the importance of designing systems that account for these emotional drivers rather than trying to force individuals to overcome them through will alone.
Yup, whether it's in policies, financial products, or even healthcare choices, adjusting the default options and framing choices in a way that minimizes negative emotional biases could lead to better outcomes across the board.
I totally agree. Before we wrap up, can we touch briefly on the broader implications? I mean, how does all of this affect our understanding of rationality in human behavior?
For sure, one of the major conclusions is that a complete theory of human rationality must include emotion. Traditional models that focus solely on logical weighting miss a huge chunk of what actually drives us. Emotions influence our relationships, physical health, economic behavior, and even political choices. Essentially, understanding emotions provides a more realistic, albeit complex picture of decision making.
It really reshapes our whole notion of rationality. And that means future research will likely continue to integrate these emotional influences into broader theories of decision making.
Yes, definitely. Researchers are already pushing for more nuanced models that combine rational calculations with our emotional lives. The hope is to eventually have a general model, like the emotion-imbued choice model, that can explain a wide array of decision scenarios across different fields. It's a thrilling frontier because it not only helps explain human behavior, but also offers practical solutions for improving decision outcomes.
Exactly, it's an exciting field with huge potential. In summary, what would you say are the most critical takeaways from this comprehensive review?
Well, there are a few core points. First, emotions are pervasive and systematically influence our judgments and decisions. They're not just random noise. Second, they operate through multiple mechanisms, shaping the content of thought, the depth of processing, and implicit goals. Third, while traditional rational choice models capture some aspects, a complete picture requires incorporating emotional inputs. And finally, when unwanted emotional biases occur, modifying the decision environment, our choice architecture, could be the most effective way to mitigate them.
Very well said. This all really highlights that to truly understand decision making, we have to embrace the messy, wonderful complexity of our emotional lives. Thanks for the deep dive. It's been incredibly enlightening.
Absolutely, it's clear that emotion and decision making are intertwined in ways that challenge and, at the same time, enrich our understanding of human behavior. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to our next deep dive into the fascinating interplay of emotion and cognition.